I found out my wife betrayed me with another woman and now must rebuild my shattered life. When people talk about betrayal, they usually picture something straightforward, a husband, a wife, and someone else sneaking in through the back door. I thought I knew what to expect if it ever happened to me, how the story would go. But nothing could have prepared me for the kind of betrayal I faced. It wasn't another man that came between us. It was another woman. I still remember the day I first suspected something was wrong. We had been married for 5 years, and life, at least on the surface, seemed perfect. Sarah was the kind of wife anyone would be proud of, smart, beautiful, loving. We did everything together, and she was my best friend, my partner. Sure, we had our ups and downs, like any couple, but never anything major. Or so I thought. It started small, almost too subtle to notice. Sarah began spending more time with a new friend she met through work, Jessica. I didn't think much of it at first. I mean, what's the harm in having friends outside the marriage, right? Sarah had always been social, and Jessica seemed nice enough. I even met her a few times, and she was friendly, outgoing. But as the months passed, I started to notice a shift in Sarah. She was more distant, more secretive. Her phone became glued to her hand, and she seemed to laugh a little too much at Jessica's texts. Still, I didn't let my mind go there. I didn't want to be that guy, the paranoid husband who jumps to conclusions over a friendship. So, I ignored the signs, convincing myself that it was all in my head. Sarah was just stressed from work, I told myself. Or maybe we were just going through a rough patch. Then came the weekend trip. Sarah told me she was going on a girls' weekend with Jessica, just to unwind. Again, nothing out of the ordinary, right? But something in her tone, something in the way she avoided eye contact, set off alarm bells in my mind. I tried to push the doubts away, but by the time she left, they had taken root deep inside me. The weekend dragged on, and every time I texted her, I got vague responses. Having fun. Talk later, or out for dinner, I'll call you tomorrow. The calls never came. It was on the second night that I did something I never thought I'd do. I checked her location. We had shared our phone locations for safety reasons years ago, and I never used it. But this time, curiosity, and a creeping sense of dread, got the better of me. When I saw that she wasn't where she said she would be, my heart sank. Instead of being at a beach resort 2 hours away, she was in a small boutique hotel on the other side of town. I couldn't breathe. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was innocent, maybe there was some reasonable explanation. But deep down, I knew there wasn't. I drove to the hotel that night, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I didn't have a plan. I didn't know what I would do when I got there. All I knew was that I had to see for myself, had to know the truth. When I arrived, I hesitated at the front desk, my pulse pounding in my ears. I couldn't exactly march up and demand to see my wife, so I did the only thing I could think of, I waited. I sat in the lobby for what felt like hours, my stomach churning with each passing minute. And then I saw them. Sarah and Jessica, walking out of the elevator together, laughing, their hands brushing in a way that was far too intimate for just friends. My chest tightened as I watched them walk to the front desk to check out. They didn't see me at first, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. It wasn't just the physical closeness that hit me, it was the way Sarah looked at her, with the same warmth and affection she used to reserve for me. When Sarah finally spotted me, her face went pale. The laughter died on her lips, and for a moment, we just stared at each other across the lobby, frozen in place. Jessica stepped back, awkwardly looking between us, but it was like everything around me disappeared. It was just me and Sarah, and the horrible truth that hung in the air between us. Without saying a word, I turned and walked out of the hotel, my heart shattering with each step. I didn't need an explanation. I didn't need to hear the excuses or the justifications. The betrayal was written all over her face. As I drove away, the realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The woman I loved, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, had been living a double life right under my nose. And she hadn't just betrayed me with another person. She had betrayed me with a part of herself I never even knew existed. The drive home that night was a blur. I wasn't sure if I was angry, heartbroken, or simply numb. My mind raced with 1,000 questions, but I had no answers. How long had this been going on? Why hadn't I seen the signs sooner? Was I to blame somehow, or was this something that had always been there, simmering beneath the surface? By the time I got home, the shock had worn off, and all that was left was raw, burning anger. I paced the living room, running through what I would say when Sarah came home. I imagined every possible conversation, every excuse or apology she might try to offer. But none of it felt real, none of it felt like enough. I had just started to calm down when I heard her car pull up. The door creaked open, and Sarah stepped inside, her face pale and her eyes filled with guilt. She didn't speak at first, just stood there, looking at me like she didn't recognize me anymore. Or maybe she didn't recognize herself. "Jake," she started, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can explain." "Explain what, Sarah?" I cut her off, my voice harsh, sharper than I intended. "That you've been sneaking around with Jessica? That you've been lying to me for who knows how long?" Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She looked down, as if ashamed, but that only made me angrier. I wanted her to look me in the eyes, to face what she had done. "How long?" I asked, my voice low and cold. She hesitated, then finally spoke. "It's been a few months." Months. The word hit me like a punch to the gut. All this time, she had been carrying on with someone else, someone I never would have suspected. "Why didn't you just tell me? If this was what you wanted, why didn't you just say something?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't feel sympathy. Not yet. I didn't know how. I didn't even understand it myself, Jake. It just happened. I scoffed, shaking my head. "It doesn't just happen, Sarah. You made a choice. You chose to lie to me. You chose to betray me." She wiped at her eyes, but the tears kept coming. "I never meant to hurt you. I still love you." Her words stung in a way I hadn't expected. Part of me wanted to believe her, to believe that this was just some mistake, some temporary lapse in judgment. But I knew better. Love didn't look like this. Love didn't lie and sneak around in the dark. "If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this," I said quietly. "You wouldn't have thrown everything we had away for her." Sarah flinched, her expression torn between regret and something else, something I couldn't quite place. "It's not that simple," she whispered. "Then explain it to me," I said, my voice rising with frustration. "Make me understand, because right now, none of this makes sense." She was silent for a long time, and for a moment, I thought she wouldn't answer. But then she spoke, her voice shaky and uncertain. "It's not about her, Jake. It's about me. I didn't know this was part of who I was. I didn't plan for this to happen, I didn't even see it coming. But when I met Jessica, I felt something I've never felt before." Her words cut deeper than I expected. I had always thought I knew Sarah better than anyone. I had always believed that what we had was strong enough to withstand anything. But now, she was telling me that there was a part of herself I had never known, a part she had kept hidden, even from herself. "So, what does that mean for us?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with sorrow. "I don't know," she said. "I don't want to lose you, Jake. But I don't know how to fix this. I don't even know if I can." Her honesty, as painful as it was, left me feeling more lost than ever. Part of me wanted to walk away, to leave her and everything we had built behind. But another part of me, the part that still loved her, the part that still believed in the life we had together, couldn't let go. Not yet. "So what do we do now?" I asked, my voice breaking. Sarah looked down at the floor, her hands trembling. "I don't know," she whispered. "I don't know if there's a way to fix this." For the first time that night, the anger in me faded, replaced by something else, something darker, something I didn't want to acknowledge. Fear. Fear that this wasn't just a rough patch we could work through. Fear that this was the beginning of the end. We stood there in silence for what felt like an eternity, neither of us knowing what to say or where to go from here. And as I looked at the woman I had loved for so long, the woman I had built a life with, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed. Whatever came next, nothing would ever be the same again. The days following the confrontation were a blur of tension and unease. The once comforting walls of our home now felt like a cage, trapping me in a constant state of anxiety and heartbreak. I was caught between a desire to understand Sarah's actions and the overwhelming urge to distance myself from the pain. Sarah and I spoke infrequently, our conversations strained and superficial. She seemed to be trying to explain, trying to make amends, but her efforts only seemed to highlight how deeply fractured our relationship had become. I found myself withdrawing more and more, retreating into a world of work and distraction, anything to avoid facing the reality of our situation. One evening, after another emotionally charged and fruitless conversation with Sarah, I decided to take a long walk. The city streets felt oddly soothing, the bustle of life continuing around me while I grappled with my own shattered world. I needed clarity, a moment of peace away from the chaos at home. As I wandered aimlessly, I stumbled upon a small park with a quiet, secluded bench. I sat down, trying to clear my mind, but the thoughts of Sarah and Jessica kept intruding. The betrayal felt like a constant weight on my shoulders, and I struggled to see a way forward. While I was lost in thought, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Sarah. "We need to talk. Please come home." I stared at the message for a few moments, my mind racing with the possibilities. What could she possibly have to say that we hadn't already discussed? Was there something new, some last-ditch attempt to salvage what was left of our marriage? Reluctantly, I made my way back home, my stomach churning with dread. As I walked through the door, Sarah was waiting for me in the living room. Her expression was a mix of determination and vulnerability, and for a moment, I felt a pang of sympathy. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice steady but tinged with nervousness. "I know we've talked about this a lot, and I've tried to explain myself. But I think it's time for us to be honest about what's really happening here." I nodded, bracing myself for what was to come. "Go on." She took a deep breath and looked me straight in the eyes. "The truth is, I don't know how to fix this. I've been trying to understand my own feelings and actions, but the more I try, the more I realize that I don't have the answers." Her honesty was both refreshing and painful. It was clear she was struggling, but her admission only made the situation more complex. "What are you saying, Sarah?" "I'm saying that maybe we need to face the reality that this relationship may be beyond repair," she said softly. "Maybe what we had isn't enough to overcome what's happened." Her words hit me like a punch. The possibility of ending our marriage was something I had been trying to avoid, something I hadn't fully faced until now. It was one thing to talk about it in theory, but another to actually hear it from her. "Are you saying you want a divorce?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Sarah nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I think it might be the best option for both of us. I never wanted to hurt you, but I can't keep pretending that everything can go back to the way it was." I sat down heavily on the couch, the weight of her words sinking in. The idea of a divorce had been a distant fear, something I pushed away. But now, it felt imminent, like a freight train barreling towards me, and I was powerless to stop it. "I need time to think," I said finally, struggling to keep my emotions in check. "This is a lot to process." Sarah nodded, her face a mask of sadness and resignation. "I understand. Take all the time you need. I just wanted to be honest with you about where I stand." We sat in silence for a while, the enormity of our situation hanging between us. I couldn't help but think about all the dreams we had shared, the future we had envisioned together. It all felt so distant now, like a different life. As Sarah left the room, I felt a profound sense of loss, not just for the relationship, but for the person I thought I knew so well. It was clear that we had reached a breaking point, and no amount of discussion or explanation could undo the damage. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with difficult decisions and emotional turmoil. But as I sat alone in the dim light of our living room, I knew that whatever came next, it would be a new chapter, one that neither of us had planned, but one that we would have to face together or apart. The weeks following our confrontation were a blur of legal consultations, emotional highs and lows, and the difficult task of untangling our lives. Sarah and I had agreed to a separation, but the logistics of our split were far from straightforward. We had to deal with everything from dividing our shared assets to figuring out where we would each live. The practicalities were overwhelming, but they also served as a distraction from the emotional wreckage we were both grappling with. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of sorting through legal paperwork, I found myself alone in the apartment we used to share. The emptiness of the space seemed to echo the emptiness I felt inside. I hadn't realized how much I had taken our home for granted until it became a symbol of everything that was falling apart. It was during this time that I found myself reflecting on the memories that had once made this place feel like home. The dinners we shared, the late-night conversations, the plans we had for the future. It all seemed so distant now, like a faded dream. Despite the emotional toll, I tried to focus on the practical aspects of the separation. I began to look for a new place to live and threw myself into my work to keep my mind occupied. It was a temporary distraction, but it helped me get through the day-to-day chaos. Sarah, too, was navigating her own challenges. She moved into a small apartment downtown, and we made an effort to communicate about the logistics of our split. It was a strange dynamic, one filled with awkward exchanges and strained politeness. We were both trying to move forward, but it was clear that the emotional wounds were still fresh. One night, Sarah called me, asking if we could meet to discuss some final details about the division of our assets. I agreed, and we met at a coffee shop, a neutral ground where we could have a relatively civil conversation. As we sat across from each other, sipping our coffee in silence, I couldn't help but notice how different Sarah looked. The vibrant woman I had known seemed subdued, her once bright eyes now holding a shadow of sadness. It was a stark contrast to the person I had seen just a few months ago, and it hit me how much this entire ordeal had affected us both. "I know this is hard," Sarah began, breaking the silence. "And I'm sorry for everything. I really am." I looked at her, feeling a mixture of anger and sympathy. "I don't think words can fix this, Sarah. What happened can't be undone." She nodded, her expression pained. "I know. I want you to know that I never meant to hurt you. I made mistakes, and I've regretted them every day since." Her apology felt hollow, but part of me was grateful for her honesty. I wasn't sure what I wanted from her, or even if I wanted anything at all. I just knew that hearing her admit her mistakes was a small, painful step towards closure. "I appreciate your honesty," I said finally. "But I think we both need to focus on moving forward. We have to let go of the past and figure out how to rebuild our lives." Sarah nodded, a tear escaping down her cheek. "I understand. And I hope you find happiness, Jake. I really do." We talked a little more about the practicalities of the separation, finalizing the details that would allow us to go our separate ways. As we parted ways that evening, I felt a sense of reluctant acceptance. We had both made mistakes, and neither of us could undo the past. But we had to find a way to move forward, for the sake of our own well-being. The process of moving on was far from easy. There were days when the pain felt unbearable, moments when I questioned whether I would ever truly be okay. But amidst the struggle, I began to find small glimmers of hope, moments of clarity, brief flashes of a future that might still hold promise. As the final stages of our separation came to a close, I found myself standing at a crossroads. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges and unknowns. But it was also a road that held the potential for renewal, for growth, and for finding a new sense of self. The end of our marriage marked the beginning of a new chapter, one that neither of us had anticipated but one that we both had to face. And while the journey was far from over, I knew that with time, patience, and self-compassion, we would each find our way through the darkness and into a brighter future. As the finality of the separation settled in, I began to experience a strange mix of relief and sorrow. The apartment was nearly empty, save for a few remaining belongings that I still needed to pack up. The process of moving out was a bittersweet one, marked by the realization that the life I had known was slipping away, replaced by an uncertain but potentially hopeful future. One evening, as I sat in the dimly lit living room, surrounded by the last few boxes, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. The pain of the betrayal was still raw, but I was beginning to understand that it was part of a larger process of healing and self-discovery. The end of my marriage with Sarah had been one of the hardest things I had ever faced, but it also marked the beginning of a new chapter in my life. I had spent so much time focusing on what I had lost that I had almost forgotten to consider what I might gain. The prospect of starting over was daunting, but it also held the promise of new experiences and personal growth. I moved into a small but cozy apartment downtown, a space that was entirely my own. The change of scenery was refreshing, offering a blank canvas on which to rebuild my life. The new place felt both unfamiliar and exciting, a place where I could start anew and create my own path. The first few weeks in the new apartment were a whirlwind of adjusting to my new surroundings and establishing a new routine. I found solace in the small victories, decorating my new space, exploring the neighborhood, and reconnecting with friends and family who had been supportive throughout this challenging time. One evening, as I was unpacking a box of old photographs, I came across a picture of Sarah and me from happier times. It was a reminder of the love and joy we had shared, but it also symbolized the end of that chapter. I realized that holding on to the past would only hinder my progress. I needed to let go, not just of the memories but of the pain associated with them. In the months that followed, I made a conscious effort to focus on my own well-being. I began to explore new hobbies, rekindled old passions, and set new personal goals. I started attending therapy sessions, which helped me process the complex emotions surrounding the end of my marriage and provided me with valuable tools for personal growth. Through this journey, I also found a renewed sense of purpose in my relationships with others. I reconnected with old friends and made new ones, each interaction bringing a fresh perspective and a sense of community that I had been missing. I realized that while the end of my marriage had been painful, it had also opened up opportunities for deeper connections and meaningful experiences. As time passed, the memories of my past relationship began to fade, replaced by the excitement of new possibilities. I started dating again, cautiously and with a newfound appreciation for the lessons I had learned. Each new relationship was approached with an open heart and a clearer understanding of what I wanted and needed in a partner. The process of healing was not linear, and there were still moments of doubt and sadness. But with each passing day, I grew stronger and more resilient. I learned to embrace the uncertainty of the future, finding comfort in the knowledge that I had the power to shape my own path. The journey from heartbreak to renewal was a difficult one, but it led me to a place of self-discovery and growth. I learned that while the end of one chapter can be incredibly painful, it also paves the way for new beginnings. And as I looked forward to the future, I felt a sense of hope and optimism that had been missing for so long. In the end, the pain of the past became a catalyst for positive change, guiding me toward a future filled with possibilities. The lessons learned and the strength gained from this experience would remain with me, shaping the person I had become and the life I was now eager to embrace. As the dust began to settle, I started to feel a sense of closure that had seemed elusive for so long. The process of disentangling my life from Sarah's had been grueling, but it was also a necessary step towards healing. I had spent months navigating the emotional and practical challenges of our separation, and now I was finally beginning to see a clearer path forward. One day, while I was going through some old letters and keepsakes, I found a handwritten note from Sarah. It was a letter she had given me years ago, filled with promises and dreams for our future. Reading it now, I was struck by how different things had turned out. The letter was a poignant reminder of the person we once were, but it also highlighted how much had changed. Instead of feeling bitter or resentful, I found that the letter helped me gain a sense of perspective. It was a reminder that our relationship had once been meaningful and that, despite everything, there had been moments of genuine connection and love. Accepting this helped me to forgive not just Sarah, but also myself. With this newfound perspective, I made a conscious decision to focus on moving forward. I began to set new goals for myself, both personally and professionally. I reconnected with passions I had neglected, like painting and hiking, and took on new challenges that pushed me out of my comfort zone. Each new endeavor was a step towards rediscovering who I was outside of my relationship with Sarah. I also continued to prioritize self-care and personal growth. Regular therapy sessions became a cornerstone of my routine, offering valuable insights and support as I navigated my way through the complexities of my emotions. The therapeutic process was enlightening, helping me to build resilience and a deeper understanding of myself. In addition to focusing on my own development, I made an effort to rebuild and strengthen my relationships with others. I reached out to friends and family who had supported me throughout the separation, deepening those connections and creating new memories. I also met new people through social activities and community events, expanding my circle and enriching my life with new experiences. One evening, as I sat in my new apartment, reflecting on the journey I had been through, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. Despite the pain and heartache, I had emerged stronger and more self-aware. The process of letting go had been difficult, but it had also been transformative. I realized that moving forward was not about erasing the past, but about integrating the lessons learned and using them to shape a better future. The end of my marriage had opened up a space for growth and renewal, and I was determined to embrace the opportunities that lay ahead. In the final stages of this chapter, I reached out to Sarah one last time. We met for a coffee, not to revisit the past, but to acknowledge the journey we had both been on. It was an opportunity to offer each other closure and to wish one another well on our respective paths. As we parted ways, there was a sense of mutual respect and understanding. We both knew that our relationship had ended, but we had come to a place of acceptance and peace. It was a bittersweet moment, but it marked the end of a difficult chapter and the beginning of a new one. Looking ahead, I felt a renewed sense of hope and optimism. The future was uncertain, but it was filled with possibilities. I was ready to embrace whatever came next, armed with the knowledge that I had the strength and resilience to navigate the challenges ahead. The journey from heartbreak to healing had been a long and arduous one, but it had also been deeply rewarding. It had taught me valuable lessons about love, forgiveness, and the importance of moving forward. And as I looked toward the future, I felt confident that I was ready to face whatever came my way, with a heart that was open to new beginnings and new opportunities.